This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. He's my favorite political antagonist. We exchange barbs and bon mots. He's a contrarian, often instructive, sometimes surprising. I read him every day, and I take my blood pressure meds because of it. He's Greg David, and he's just published a new book, Modern New York, The Life and Economics of a City. Greg was the editorial director of Crain's New York Business for 25 years, and now writes a weekly column and blogs for the publication. He's a colleague of mine at CUNY's Graduate School of Journalism, where he directs the Business and Economics Reporting Program. Welcome back, Greg, and congratulations.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to an exchange of views
Oh,
here.
please. I had to take a double dose of my atenolol, over the last week. Let's get to the book itself. What's the central thesis of the book? Why did you write this book?
I wrote this book to try to explain why New York became so rich and prosperous and whether it will continue to be so. And in doing so, I've basically written about how Wall Street came to dominate the New York economy and why, and the important roles that mayors have played in shaping the city's economy. I think one of the things I learned most, and after all I covered this story for more than 20 years, was the connections between how the economy works and how City Hall works, and how it's not what most people think City Hall does. It's not economic development as is widely understood in New York.
Well, what is it?
What is it? It's about the big policies that mayors put in place. It's about tax policy, and it's about whether the mayors provide leadership in the city or not. It's not about whether
Leadership meaning what?
When Rudy Giuliani was elected mayor in 1993, there was this burst of optimism in the city, particularly among business people. And business people for the first time went out and said, for the first time in a few years, said, we're going to invest. And I found this great story in Crain's in which Mitchell Moss, an NYU professor and often quoted observer, says that the job of the mayor is to be the chief mental health officer of the city. And you know what? I think there's an enormous amount of truth in that.
Absolutely. And some succeed better than others. What is the modern city? Let's just walk through this title. When you say modern New York, what's the benchmark? What's the date?
Well, I thought the date was going to be 1969 because when I started to work on the book, I knew 1969 represented the city's employment peak, about 3.8 million jobs. And it was the beginning of the worst recession New York has ever had, 1969 to 1977, loss of 620,000 jobs. Population goes down by almost 1 million in that decade. But what I discovered is that the recession of 69 to 77 was made so much worse by the policies of John Lindsay that I went back to his election in 1965. Also, the first term of John Lindsay, which no one seems to remember, coincided with the first great Wall Street boom in New York, called the go-go years. And that shows the interconnection as we have Wall Street and what's happening at City Hall. That first boom is incredible and I guess lost in history. In those years, Wall Street added 40,000 jobs. Its employment grew by 60%. They're not the kind of jobs that we talk about today. A lot of them were low-paying office jobs, exchanging papers and trying to match up trades. But the Lindsay boom of the first years was driven by the first great Wall Street boom. People think Wall Street has always been crucial to New York and Wall Street has always been synonymous with New York. But in the 60s, Wall Street accounted for 3% of the city's employment and only 6% of the income in the city.
But in the book, Wall Street is the 900-pound gorilla that walks throughout the entire book. How did it become so?
It became so through a series of booms, the first ones in the 60s. Maybe the most important one is in the 80s, when interest rates are deregulated. The bond market becomes an extraordinary force in the American economy. You start to trade bonds the way you do stocks, and companies can raise capital in all kinds of new ways. It's the era of the invention of the junk bond and securitization. But the crucial firm in the 80s is Salomon Brothers. It was in the 80s what Goldman Sachs is today, and it dominated New York. And one of the most important things which illustrates how Wall Street came to dominate New York is the CEO of Salomon Brothers was John Gutfreund. And in 1986, he made this enormous sum of $3.1 million. It was fodder for the tabloids. It was outrageous. Michael Lewis writes in Liar's Poker that it was this unique moment in time. Keep in mind $3.1 million. It's the equivalent.
About $7?
$7 million today. In 2007, Lloyd Blankfein, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, this era's John Gutfreund, made $68.5 million.
Okay, let's make a moral judgment here. I mean, is that good? Irrespective of any economic analysis, is that good?
Moral judgments I don't do in the book, but I do this judgment. Wall Street is a crucial cog in the national and world economy. Wall Street has had many innovations in this period to help. But
wait a minute, wait a second, but not necessarily good innovations.
No, there were good innovations.
And there were bad ones too.
Well, there was a lot of bad things that happened with the good innovation. Take the internet boom and bust. A lot of craziness in the internet boom of the 1990s. So many companies were fraudulent. But what came out of that boom? Well, Amazon.com, which changed so much about our lives. Each boom has had important innovations that have helped. But there's nothing that justifies an increase in pay on Wall Street of 9 times between Gutfreund.
We won't call it a moral judgment. We'll call it some other kind of judgment.
Wall Street's great innovation is greed.
And also, it would seem its Achilles heel is also greed.
I would agree with that. The point I want to make in the book is it's that greed which has made New York such a rich and prosperous place. You can say it's morally bad, but New York would not be...
And also, it's socially bad.
You can say all those things, but New York would not be the prosperous place that it is without that greed.
Okay, let's move on. Let's look at the subtitle of the book, The Life and Economics of the City. Now, it's 218 pages, and you're talking about, let me do my math, 47 years. It's the book, when you read it, is really the economics and the Wall Street economics of a city. There's very little about the life of the city.
I don't know.
Go ahead.
About that. It's a title. The Life of the City. I just want to make it clear the book is not just about CEOs.
Right.
I've tried to show in the book how immigrants have mattered. As a matter of fact, to take the role of immigrants in New York, they're just crucial to the city's success story. Remember, after we lost almost 1 million people in the 70s, we were headed to some supersized Boston. Or worse, if those trends had continued, we'd look like Detroit, you know. There'd be whole
I think that's a little bit of hyperbole, but go ahead.
But with the changes in the law and the arrival of
the 65 immigration
the 65 immigration law, immigrants began to arrive. They went into the worst neighborhoods because that's what they could afford, and they rebuilt the city. I think this is one way in which you can illustrate the limits of public policy. One of Ed Koch's supposed great achievements is his housing plan, which many people credit with changing the neighborhood. Was it good policy? Of course it was good policy. But it wouldn't have succeeded without the wave of immigration which changed New York. I spend a lot of time in the book on the rise of the tourism industry, which is so crucial to New York. And that tourism industry has, been staffed by immigrants and provided an enormous economic ladder for immigrants to rise in the city of New York. I portray this housekeeper at the Marriott Marquis, Constance Williams, who came to New York and leads a comfortable middle-class lifestyle on a housekeeper's job. A lot of people like
Is she unionized?
Yeah, no, the Marriott's not unionized, but that doesn't matter because the Marriott matches the union's pay. The unionization of the hotel industry does raise wages. As a matter of fact, they just signed a contract where housekeepers will soon be making $60,000, and even in New York, $60,000, especially in a two-income family, gets you a middle-class lifestyle.
Okay. What would you like to have included that would have made this a 418-page book instead of a 218? What's on the floor or in the wastebasket or in your files that's waiting?
My regret, and it wouldn't have made it a 400-page book, but it would have made it a 250-page book, is I did not deal extensively with the inequality issue that you mentioned. And in a way, it's in the book, but not in nearly the full form.
Yeah, and really it doesn't come until the last chapter where you talk about its impact.
And to be frank, when I started the book, inequality was not the issue it is today.
Well, Occupy Wall Street.
Right, and so I got caught on the timing of it, and a colleague of ours who read the book for me said to me, wow, you really got caught on the timing of this, didn't you? And if my deadline had been 2 months later, I would have had a whole chapter on the issues of inequality, the role the city might, or in my view, should not play on inequality.
You've got a blog.
And I do blog on it a lot. If you want to tackle the inequality issue, look, there's no doubt inequality is growing in the country and has grown.
And it has pernicious consequences. And when you talk about the interrelationships of economics and politics, clearly the inequality economically has profound political consequences, no?
Inequality has profound consequences, but the way the inequality debate has been shaped is very misleading. You have to recognize that the income of the wealthy is not based primarily on wages. It's based in large measure on capital gains, whatever, and it goes up and down. So most of the statistics everybody knows about inequality are from 2007. Getting much less attention were statistics from 2009, which showed that inequality had narrowed sharply in those last 2 years. As a matter of fact, inequality as of 2009 was no worse than the late 1980s and early 1990s.
Which may be, just choosing the benchmark that works best.
And I think that's absolutely right. But the Fiscal Policy Institute in New York, which has made such a case about how bad inequality is in New York, did a study that got enormous attention based on 2007 figures and did not update it for the 2009 figures. So it's not the kind of work I can do, but it seems to me we ought to know what 2009 is. Now the markets are recovering and the issues inequality might grow again. The more important issue, which is relevant to the book, is can New York City attack the inequality issue? Because that's what the living wage fight in New York is about.
And paid health,
sick leave, and especially whether we're going to have even higher taxes on the rich in New York City. I did an event last night and someone asked me that question, well, can't we raise the taxes on the rich? Well, I would begin this discussion by saying New York is the only city in the country with a progressive income tax.
But that doesn't answer the question. Can't we tax the rich at higher levels, even given this progressive income tax?
No, we cannot.
Why?
There is a point at which they will cease to be here and move their business.
Okay, now wait a minute. What's the data that suggests, what studies suggest that raising personal income taxes causes an outflight of the wealthy? All the studies that I've seen, the Princeton study, etc., suggest the opposite. This is one of these things that's often stated but unproved.
Well, I think it's unproven on both sides. The most studies ask business leaders where do they rank taxes, and they rank them 6th or 7th on most lists, and people say...
Particularly in terms of locational decision-making.
Right, but people say taxes don't matter. But we do know that companies move for tax reasons. Also, we do know that the fastest growing states in the country have the lowest tax rates. It seems
but there are other factors as well.
Of course, that's the trouble, right?
I mean, space, labor, all these other things.
And the same applies to the rich. New York is incredibly attractive to the rich today, and the city's income tax rate does not matter today. But if we raised it sharply, would it matter in the future?
Well, it depends how you define sharply, the percentages, et
I
cetera.
agree.
Okay.
It's one of the most controversial issues.
Okay, let's talk about New York City mayors, because you deal essentially with, what, 5 New York City mayors? Well, really 6 New York City mayors. Lindsay, Beam, Koch, Dinkins, Giuliani, and Bloomberg. Now, you've got several heroes here. I mean, clearly, you've got column A and column B. In column A, you've got Koch, Giuliani, and Bloomberg, and in column B, you have the other 3. Right. Now, I've got particular gripes regarding your characterization of Dave Dinkins. Now, you know, full disclosure, I worked in Dave's 1989 campaign. I think you're unnecessarily sharp in your criticism of Dinkins without giving him credit. Nowhere in this book did I read about his tennis stadium that brings in $800 million a year. You would have think, you know, nearly $1 billion would have gotten a mention from Greg David.
Other people have said the same thing about Lindsay, that I'm unnecessarily harsh
Sam
about
Robertson
Disney.
Sunday said the same thing.
Even bad mayors do good things, and even good mayors do bad things. Lindsay and Beam, although Beam started to change towards the end of his administration in a way that no one seems to remember, were fundamentally out of a New York tradition in which business and the economy was a resource to be taxed and regulated for social and economic good. Ed Koch changed that. You know, unexpectedly, Ed Koch was a pretty predictable liberal from Greenwich Village. But when he came in 1978, New York was at its worst. We had just finished this horrible recession, 620,000 jobs. We were soon going to be told we'd lost 1 million people. And Koch came to the realization that he could not save the city unless the economy revived.
Yeah, but that didn't require great insight.
Yes, it did. That's the shocking thing. Today you say that. Today you say that.
Well, I lived through it, but go ahead.
But then it wasn't so self-evident. He said in a very important interview in the New York Times about in the mid-'80s on the 10th anniversary of the fiscal crisis, in his inimitable way, that mayors used to talk about how they wanted to make New York the #1 city of the nation in welfare. They never talked about jobs and profits. My job is to get the economy going and to make people want, and businesses want to stay.
It's a little bit, you know, of classic Ed Koch hyperbole, but go ahead.
But he did. He changed the way mayors have thought. And that philosophy has governed New York ever since, for the most part. It has governed it through Koch and Giuliani and Bloomberg, despite the differences. All of them put the economy and business at the top of their priority list and say the health of the city depends on the economy and business, and I have to do what I can to make them prosper. As for the Dinkins era, I just think Dinkins was lost as mayor. He was indecisive, and as a result, I think that's one of the things that made the second worst recession in New York, which you can date from '87 or '89 to '90.
No, in fact, you generously quote me in the book, having been in a meeting with Ray Horton of the Citizens Budget Commission, when Ray said to Dave, who would want to be mayor of New York City? And nobody was talking about the recession at all.
The economy did not factor in the 1989 campaign at all.
It didn't.
And this is a lesson for today, because the stock market crashed in '87.
Right.
Koch put on a hiring freeze. Everybody thought disaster would happen because by '87, unlike '69, we understood Wall Street's importance.
Sure.
To the city. But nothing happened. And that's because we didn't know at the time that social service hiring, which was government funded, and government hiring, as Koch rebuilt the city's workforce from the fiscal crisis, was so strong, because the local numbers, you don't find out immediately what's happening. The private sector did begin to cut back shortly after the '87 crash. And so we went through 2 years when the idea in New York was that the city was holding its own.
Right.
And then the bottom fell out in '89, actually in October, just as the voters went to the polls.
Tell me.
But it is incredible in retrospect that there is no mention of the economy virtually no mention of the economy in the '89 race, either in
Except
the Democratic...
I have to tell you that we prepared an extensive position paper for the campaign that got some publicity, very much on the economy. As New York is a world city, I still have a copy of it, but that's all personal stuff. Let's go to, let's do a little ranking. So you've got Koch, Giuliani, and Bloomberg. You say in the book that Mike Bloomberg is the most important politician of modern New York. Let me ask a different question, and how you correlate the answers. Is Mike Bloomberg the best mayor in the era of modern New York, in your estimation, and why?
Yes, and here's why. Because the Bloomberg administration finally broke the chains of the myth of manufacturing.
This is your bugaboo, this myth of manufacturing. Talk about the myth and how harmful it was, at least in your eyes.
The myth of manufacturing was once the city's most important industry. Gradually, we lost our competitive advantage, and then in that terrible recession, we lost 400,000 manufacturing jobs. In 1958, we had 1 million manufacturing jobs after World War II. In 1958, when I have the first numbers that people keep, we still had 950,000. Today, we have 70,000. Manufacturing just can't survive in New York in any fundamental way. But for 30 years, mayors have attempted to find policies that have spent billions, not millions, billions of dollars in an futile effort to preserve manufacturing jobs. But mostly what happened, as manufacturing retreated, vast areas of New York, especially along the waterfront, have been left underutilized. And no one would tackle those issues. Now, how did that hurt the economy? In each boom, in the 1987 boom, in the 2000 boom, and the 2007 boom, jobs began to leave New York at the peak of the boom because there was nowhere to put those people. 3 times we approached the 1969 employment peak of 3.8 million, and each time we falter, in large measure because the jobs go elsewhere. Look at those towers along the Hudson River in New Jersey. Those were all built because there was nowhere to put them. Dan Doctorow comes to New York, wants to bring the Olympics to New York, has to cite the facilities for New York. He discovers this. He sees the waterfront is so underutilized. He's going to use it.
Well, he wasn't the first one. There was a long string of folks that talked about waterfront revitalization in many ways.
But no one confronted it as fundamentally as Dr. Ruff did. Remember, Dr. Ruff got the job as deputy mayor because he was, as Nate Leventhal told me, who arranged this hiring, he wasn't a city official. He wouldn't take no for an answer. He wouldn't go into the job thinking of all the things he couldn't do. Under the Bloomberg administration, we have rezoned all that waterfront space, not only for commercial office space, but for residences. If the economy prospers, we have a place to put those jobs.
Okay, in the last 5 minutes, let's talk about New York City's future, and let's talk specifically about politics 2013. First of all, in one of your more recent blogs, you talked about the new IBO report is saying the sky's the limit forecast for New York City. And when you actually read the analysis by IBO, they're talking about 400,000 plus jobs over the next cycle, which would bring us beyond the 1969 levels. But again, given the fact that we're, often antagonists, you end the first page of the blog saying, I'm not ready to bury the boom and bust cycle until the future of Wall Street is much clearer. You make the charge that they say that the boom and bust cycle has come to an end after 43 years. I read all 53 pages of it. It ain't here. Is this a straw man?
No, it's not a straw man.
I mean, it sounds like a straw man to me.
To add 400,000 jobs in the next 6 years, or whatever years they have, would be just an incredible accomplishment. We've never done that.
And then it's not going to happen? What's the nature of the analysis that you find faulty?
The problem is we don't know whether Wall Street is going to thrive or not. What we know is
But they're not saying that Wall Street necessarily thrives.
Well, they are presuming that Wall Street does okay. Here's the issue. Wall Street was bailed out by the banks, right? And that's why it didn't have this.
Well, Wall Street was bailed out
by the feds.
By the feds. And you give a lot of credit to George Bush, but none to Obama, I noticed.
The bank bailout came before Obama.
Well, both.
Anyway, there's an enormous, with this enormous contraction we expected on Wall Street did not happen. But we do not know the effects of Dodd-Frank and other regulations. And the whole tenor in the country is still to rein in Wall Street, to force down compensation, to do all that. We do not know what Wall Street's ultimate future. That's issue one. Issue two, there is not a single candidate in the Democratic primary in 2013 who shares the Koch, Giuliani, Bloomberg philosophy of putting the economy first. They hearken back to the Lindsay era of using city government to redress
and you're basing
social
this, and you're basing this on what?
I'm basing it on Walmart, on living wage, on sick leave, and on
but they differ on those candidates differ on those issues.
Only this much.
So you're saying that what does a de Blasio administration look like that is so fundamentally different than Bloomberg?
It passes laws to make New York different. It keeps Walmart from being here. It establishes living wage and sick leave requirements that don't exist anywhere else, and presumably goes.
Well, that's not quite true. It does. Those things do exist in other places.
Not in the nearby areas of New York, and it probably leads to higher taxation. Now, let me make one point clear.
Go ahead.
They're not going to come on this show and tell you that. You have to listen and analyze the rhetoric in a context. As a matter of fact, their important strategic need at the moment is to make sure that no one is alarmed by them, so that they don't face an independent candidate in the general election that would be dangerous. Remember, except for Dinkins, I mean, in the last 20 years, if we just take Giuliani and Bloomberg, Republican or independent candidates have won every single election and bested the winner of the Democratic primary. These candidates.
But there are a whole host of factors that were involved in that are in some ways idiosyncratic and not systemic.
Well, that's what the Democrats.
Oh man, we could go through this. We need another half hour then, Greg. Come on.
So anyway, there are three possibilities. If Wall Street thrives, it won't matter. There'll be so much money sloshing around New York, it won't matter. If Wall Street doesn't thrive, the winner of the Democratic primary could become somewhat like Ed Koch and say, I understand the implications. Primarily, we're going to have to reduce the size of city government, make enormous changes there, and do it. The third, the worrisome part for me, is that with Wall Street not being the economic engine, especially the tax revenue engine that it has been, a mayor says, it doesn't matter, I'm going to be like John Lindsay, and that could have enormous implications.
Okay, I mean, since I'm the host, I want the last word.
Be my guest.
The economy, it seems, looking at the various studies that I've looked at, seems to be more diversified and therefore less harmed by these boom and bust cycles that Wall Street both creates and is the victim of. And maybe the economy, therefore, is a better economy because of that.
We are much more diversified than anyone knows. That's why the recession wasn't so great. But none of those industries which have diversified throws off the kind of money Wall Street is. Will it be the 70s again? No, because we are diversified. Unless things happen I don't foresee. But we are rich because of Wall Street. We will be less rich if Wall Street isn't so great.
Oh, man, we got to go on with this one. My thanks to Greg David for being on the show. See you next week when my guests will be Carl Meyer and Shireen Brysack, co-authors of Pax Ethnica, Where and How Diversity Succeeds, here on CUNY TV. Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.